If you're going to start drawing in Photoshop, I would always recommend that you start off by experimenting with the brush tool first, just to get a feel of what you can do with it. So when you open up your new page in Photoshop, the first thing I would always recommend you do is go down to your layers panel here. Down the bottom here, because what you want to do is make sure that you're not working on this background layer. You want to make sure that this background layer remains a white plain layer that has not been used. So if you go down to the bottom of your layers panel, you've got some buttons down here. So to create a new layer to work on, you click on the little plus and it will give you a layer, and we're going to work on this layer. Now the benefit of that is it's easier to rub things out, it's easier to get rid of it if you don't want it anymore, and you won't lose your white background. It's always best to keep this white background plain and clear. So we're going to create that new layer. If you ever want to delete a layer, you just go to the little dustbin next to it and it'll ask you if you want to delete it, and you just press yes. And then if you want to create a new layer, again, you can very easily just click on this little plus symbol down the bottom and it will create a new layer for you. So the first thing you need to do is to locate the brush tool. Now in Photoshop there's a lot you can do, and there's a lot of different tools. So you've got your toolbars down the left hand side here, and your brush tool is this tool here. So if I hover over it, it gives you a little example of what you can do with it here, and you can even click on learn how, and it will give you some basic tutorials. So if I click on the brush tool, now I've got a very simple brush that I can draw with. So that's alright, but you can customize your brushes in lots and lots of different ways. So I'm going to show you how. If you do something and you don't want it anymore, the easiest way to get rid of it is just press Ctrl and Z. Ctrl Z, undo. It just undoes anything that you've done. So your last stroke, you can easily undo it. If I've done a few strokes, you can press Ctrl Z, it'll undo the last one, and you can press Ctrl Z again and again to undo as many times as you need to. So we've got our brush tool over here. The next thing we need to do is look at some of the settings at the top, because these are really useful. I'll talk to you about colour in a little bit. So the first thing we've got, if we go to the top, that's just your home menu. That will just take you back to the start. But here you've got your brush settings. So if I go here, click on here, you've got some basic settings or different brushes that you can go through and have a play with and choose. So if I just close these folders, you've got a series of folders with lots of different brushes in there. As you can see by clicking on the little arrow, it opens that folder up. So if I start at the top, and I'll just show you some of the basic ones. Okay, so if we start at the very top, if I choose this soft round pressure opacity, I'll show you what that does. So once you come over here and you start drawing, that box will disappear. Again, I don't really want that, so Ctrl Z to undo. So what that one does, okay, soft round pressure opacity, is it means that if I press lightly, then I get a really light line, and if I then start pressing much harder with my pen, then I get a darker line. This is really useful if you're doing shading work, so it's very easy to build up tonal shading using this brush. So that's probably one of the main benefits of using this brush. It's really good for building up tones in a drawing. Okay, so Ctrl Z, get rid of those because I don't want those anymore. And I'm just keep pressing Ctrl Z until I get rid of everything. So if I go back up to the top, that was the top one. The next one is soft round brush. So that one is just a bog standard soft round brush. It has no pressure sensitivity whether I press really hard or really light. It's just a soft brush, and it's got the same thickness the whole way through, and it's the same density as well of colour. If I go back up to the top of my menu, I've got hard round brush. That's exactly the same as this one, only hard edge. So if I draw with it, I get a nice hard edge with that. Let's go back up to the top here. The next one I've got is soft round pressure size. So what that one does when I'm drawing with it, if I press really lightly, I get a thin line, and then the harder I press, the line gets thicker and thicker, and it's got a soft edge as well. If I go back up here, it said soft round pressure size, so it gives me a soft edge as well as the thin or thick lines. The next one, it's hard round pressure size, so it's exactly the same, only without the soft edge. So if I click on there and I draw, press lightly, press dark, press hard, I get a much thicker line, but this time my edges are really thick. If I go down to the next one, this is soft round pressure opacity and flow. So if I click on there, just move that up a little bit so we can see. And then what we've got is if we press lightly, it's light. If we press hard, we get a harder edge as well. So it's very similar to the first one we looked at. Again, really good for building up blending in tones and textures. So those are some of the simple brushes. Let me just undo all of those to get rid of them. You may find as you're drawing, you want to change the thickness of your brush. At the moment, my brush, or each of those lines have all been the same thickness. I might decide I want a thicker line or a thinner line. Really, really easy to change the thickness of your brush by just clicking on the square brackets on the keyboard. You can go up to the top the menu here and you can change the size here, but the problem with this is it's alright if you know how many pixels you want your brush size to be, but it's very difficult to see how big that is. Okay, it's very difficult to judge. You know, you come over here, you can see, move it up a bit, come and have a look. It's a bit annoying. I prefer to use the square brackets on the keyboard next to the P, and you can see your brush getting bigger or smaller, so it's much easier to decide how big a brush you would like to create that way. Another way of getting to the brush menu, it gives you a bit more options. If you want more options, this is really good for like some quick changing of brushes. It also saves the last few that you've done at the top here. So if there's some you use quite regularly, they'll usually appear up at the top here. But if you click on, that happens when I click on there. If you click on this tool here, you get more brush options. Let me just pull that over there, because for you, when you do this, it will appear here. And you've got this here is a menu of all of the brushes that you've got installed on your computer, and you can go through them here. The benefit of doing this is down here you can see what the brush will look like as it's drawn. So you can go through and you can see, if you draw a line with each brush, what it will look like. Other things that you can do, you can see the circle, you can change the angle of your brush as well. So can you see how that changes the angle? If I open my spacing out, sometimes that's quite good. Grab that and pull that over. You can change the spacing and it gives you the shape if you drew it like that. So for example, instead of having a straight line, it gives you the dotted effect that you can see over here. Sometimes opening the spacing is good just to see the angle or the shape of the brush that you're creating, and then you can decide whether or not you want to bring it back or add some texture. It's completely up to you. You can have a play around with it, so that's quite useful as well. You've got these other settings here, which, you know, when you click onto these, you can play around with the size jitter. So as I move that, you can see how it changes the size of each of these different shapes. If you want different textures, you can experiment with the diameter. There's lots and lots of different things that you can experiment with and play around with, and you can see down at the bottom what that looks like. So feel free, if you don't like it, you can just untick it or go back to normal, or you can tick it and it'll apply the changes that you've just made. You can go through all of these different menus. So you've got scatter there, so that will scatter where your brush sits, and the count is, I suppose, how many, so more or fewer, adding texture. So there's lots of different ones. I won't go through all of them now, but you can go and experiment and have a play around with the different settings that you can create and experiment over here with some of those. Again, you can use your square brackets to change the size as well, and you can play around with that as well. So if I just close that, click on the double arrow at the top to close that, just to get it out of your way. So you just click on there to get rid of it. Couple more things I'll show you. Firstly, I'll show you the opacity. That can be quite useful sometimes. If I change my brush to one that doesn't have an opacity, so let me just do that one there, would be good. So that's a normal 100% opacity. Means it's completely opaque and you can't see through your brush at all. It will always cover whatever's underneath. If I change the opacity, make it more transparent, it gets lighter, but it's not really getting lighter, it's becoming transparent, so you'll be able to see things that are underneath like that. So you can easily change the opacity of your brush that way. Just remember, if you put the opacity down, to bring it back up again when you've finished. So that's that one. You can also change the colour very easily a couple of ways. You can come down here, often I'll come down here, or you can do it up here as well in exactly the same way. So you can go through the different colours, and you can choose a colour. So if you want a really bright version of that colour, a pure version of that colour, you go in the top. If you want a darker version of that colour, you just work your way down. If you want a lighter version of the colour, you work your way over to the white. And then in the bottom corner it adds greys to it, so if you want more of a greyish tone to your colour, you can go down there. So those are some of the first basics that I would recommend that you experiment with and play around with before you start actually doing any real drawing.